The Romans occupied this country for over 400 years. They had over 25,000 men stationed here, and they imprinted themselves very firmly on the British landscape. They brought with them their architecture and their technology. They built cities and forts and farms and villas here, linked by a network of arrow-straight military roads to move their legions quickly to any trouble spot. They made wine here and reared families, grew up and died here. Thousands of Romans lie buried on British soil. For a long time, Colchester, out on the East Anglian marshes, was the Roman capital of the country. One of the roads leading out of the city ran east to West Mersey Island. The modern road follows the old Roman causeway. West Mersey Island was well developed. It had farms and villas, and a Roman princess. Legend has it that she was married to a centurion from Colchester, and that she is buried in a large burial mound quite close to the road. Some local people would claim that the Romans are still active on West Mersey Island. Jill Smeaton, for example, who lives very close to the burial mound, has heard them.
Well, in 1987, I'd been living here, I suppose then, for about 10 years. And I'd always been a little bit frightened, perhaps, when I was going out to do the late night feeds, because we keep horses here. But after 9-10 years of seeing and hearing absolutely nothing, I'd forgotten all about it, to be honest with you. And then suddenly it was the night of the autumn equinox, as I say, 1987, September the 23rd. Very, very black night. There was absolutely no moon whatsoever. The tide was over the Strood, so we were actually cut off at that time. I think it was around 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm a very, very heavy sleeper. I don't wake up for anything normally. And yet suddenly I just sat bolt upright in bed, because going past my bedroom window, we live in a bungalow, was the sound, very, very clear, definite sound of 2 horses unshod, walking along as though they were going through reeds or long grass, which was extraordinary because I'd cut the grass that very day. It had been long, but it was completely shorn. But it was a swishing, whooshing noise, and coming behind these 2 horses was the sound of very, very heavy wooden cartwheels just rumbling along, not going very fast as you might imagine a chariot, but just rumbling along. Whether it was perhaps a funeral procession, I don't know, it could even have been that. But it was such a heavy wagon or whatever that they were, or cart that they were dragging, that the walls of the bungalow were actually reverberating. It was really like being in the middle of a Western movie, just the noise of the horses and carts going past. And my friend in the room next door heard exactly the same thing. And although she's a much lighter sleeper than I am, I mean, I'd normally sleep through anything, but we both rushed out into the hallway, and funny enough, her husband didn't hear anything, nothing at all, and yet the 2 of us heard this tremendous rumbling noise going past, thought our horses were out, looked out of the window in a panic, thinking we were going to have to rush out and herd them up, but they were just going past too slowly for them. We couldn't see anything, and our own horses just a few hundred yards away were completely silent. So we then heard it move away. We looked through the windows, couldn't see a thing, but again, as I say, it was completely black. And it seemed to move across the road, away from the Strood, and go up in the region of Dawes Lane.
Many other people have heard similar sounds of carts and chariots moving across the island. Others claim to have seen the centurion husband, perhaps on his way to visit his wife's tomb.
One September night, my friend and I came back from Colchester. We'd been to the local, one of the pubs in there, and had a few drinks and saw some of our girlfriends and that. We came back onto Mersey Island over the Strood on the East Mersey Road. As we turned into Dawes Lane, about 400 yards up the road, where there was a pond and haystacks, misty night, in the headlights, this figure came out between the pond and the haystacks, walking towards the mound. And he looked a Roman centurion. He had a helmet on, with an eagle on the front. He had a shield, he had a sword, he had a uniform on, and he sort of had a red skirt, but we couldn't see his legs. And we stopped the car, and my friend said, "We'll have him tonight." And he jumped out of the car and I followed. We went about 400 yards down the road where there's a mound, Roman mound, with an opening in it. And he sort of looked at us and then he disappeared.
We were coming along Mersey Strood one evening at about 12 o'clock. It was high tide and a full moon, and as we were going along the Strood, I was happened to look across the opposite side of the road, and there was somebody walking along, and I looked, and it was the Roman ghost. And I said to my husband, "Oh look, there's the Roman ghost." And my husband said, "Don't be so silly, what on earth are you talking about?" And we turned round and came back, and we came along slowly, and I wound my window down on my side because I was on the near side, and had a look, and there was this Roman, and my husband saw him as well, and he was all dressed up and holding his two spears, and he had all the leather sort of skirt on, and he was sort of very upright and straight, and he was quite a large man, and he was just looking straight ahead. He was looking, his face was all rounded face, and his eyes was just looking straight ahead. And we went further up, turned round. Then when we turned round, came back, he just completely disappeared. And the water was at high tide, it was level with the pavement, and there was no boats, no cars, not a bicycle, nothing, and he just completely gone.
Sounds, of course, totally inexplicable. What can possibly be happening in these kinds of experience? How can Roman soldiers still be marching across the countryside nearly 2,000 years after the legions left these shores? What do the scientists have to say about it all?
Well, that's a major question. When the Society for Psychical Research was set up over a century ago by a group of very distinguished academics from Cambridge University, the belief was that they would very quickly, by using scientific methods, they would find out exactly the reality or otherwise of phenomena of this kind. Well, 100 years later, we're still searching, we're still looking. And the Society, over that century, has had many of the most brilliant scientists in the country as members. All that they've been able to do in the end is to be relatively convinced that these phenomena happen, but we're very, very far from an explanation of them. It ends up in the end as a matter of belief.
One extraordinary theory that has some currency argues that in some way buildings and rocks and the earth itself absorb energy from living beings who inhabit them, and that later on, under certain conditions, that energy, that signal, can be replayed, rather like a CD or a tape. Indeed, it's called the stone tape theory.
You have to postulate that in the case of a typical haunt, some very emotion-laden scene or some very important scene from the point of view of the humans who took part in it has somehow become registered on the environment, not necessarily within a house, maybe even outside, and that it's almost like a sort of psychic video that has been created. And someone who comes along who is sensitive enough to act as a psychic video player will actually play that tape and see the figures, or perhaps even hear voices, or hear sounds. And it is nothing to do with the people who originally were there. They're no longer there. It's simply a record.
If you imagine some sort of environment whereby, say, some individual undergoes some drastic effect, like decapitated or something like that, then the energy liberated at that particular point in time, in fact, is transmitted, expelled into the surrounding material and stored in that material. These subtle energies, a series of vibrational frequencies, can in fact then be read out at some later time, very much like say, a video recording. So a sequence of rather drastic events can in fact be recorded in living matter.